Part 1. The Birth of a Legend, 1938. In the midst of a turbulent era, when the weight of the Great Depression pressed heavily on the hearts of millions, a spark of hope was quietly kindled. This is the story of a hero whose very existence was meant to remind the world that even in darkness, light could prevail. In 1938, America was a nation yearning for renewal. Economic hardship had cast long shadows over cities and towns alike, and people found solace in simple dreams of a better tomorrow. It was in this environment, a time when despair and uncertainty loomed large, that two young visionaries set out to create something extraordinary. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were not yet household names, but they shared a deep passion for storytelling and a desire to inspire. Both young men, still navigating the complexities of youth, were united by a belief that heroes could emerge even from the bleakest of circumstances. In a modest apartment filled with hand-drawn sketches and rough manuscripts, they began to craft a character unlike any the world had ever seen. From their creative forge emerged the character of Superman, a being born not of privilege or circumstance, but of resilience and hope. His origins were as extraordinary as the times that birthed him. According to the myth they wove, Superman was born on the distant, doomed planet Krypton, a world destined for destruction. In a final act of salvation, his parents sent him away in a small, fragile rocket, setting him on a course for Earth, a planet that would become his new home. Arriving on Earth as a helpless infant, Superman was found and raised by a kindly couple in the heartland of America, in a quiet Kansas town. These humble farmers nurtured him, instilling in him a simple, grounded sense of morality and compassion. They named him Clark Kent, a name that would become synonymous with the idea that greatness can come from even the most unassuming beginnings. Imagine the scene: a crisp autumn evening in Kansas, the golden hues of farmland stretching out under a wide, star-filled sky. In a small farmhouse, a baby slept peacefully, a child destined to transform the fabric of popular culture. His journey was one of discovery, learning that the powers within him were not just physical, but symbolic of an ideal greater than any individual. Superman's abilities, as depicted in those early pages of Action Comics #1, were both awe-inspiring and metaphorical. Here was a character who could lift impossibly heavy objects, outrun the fastest trains, and leap over towering obstacles with ease. But more than his super strength and speed, Superman embodied virtues that resonated deeply with an audience in need of reassurance. He was a guardian of truth and justice, a living reminder that hope could overcome the gravest challenges. At a time when the world was rife with political and social strife, Superman's debut was more than just entertainment. It was a beacon of optimism. In an era when the headlines were filled with stories of economic collapse and looming global conflict, this new hero offered a vision of renewal and resilience. His very presence on the page suggested that no matter how dire circumstances might seem, there was always the possibility of rising above adversity. Siegel and Shuster's creation was a masterstroke of storytelling. They blended elements of science fiction with the timeless appeal of mythic heroes, crafting a narrative that was both fantastical and deeply human. Their work laid the foundation for what would become a vast and enduring mythos, a universe where the extraordinary was interwoven with the everyday. This early vision of Superman was revolutionary. He was not merely a character in a comic book. He was an ideal. For readers, he represented the possibility of transformation. The notion that even ordinary individuals, when faced with overwhelming challenges, could find within themselves the strength to be more than what the world expected. The pages of Action Comics #1 captured more than a hero's journey. They captured a moment in history. Each panel was a silent promise to the downtrodden that heroes existed and that they came in many forms. In Superman's eyes, One could see the glimmer of potential, the unspoken challenge to a world that had almost forgotten how to dream. As the character evolved in subsequent issues, the mythology around him grew richer and more layered. Yet, it all began with that single, brilliant concept: a baby from a dying world, raised with love and destined for greatness. In the soft glow of early comic panels, Superman's story was a gentle lullaby for a weary nation, urging everyone to believe in the possibility of miracles. Now, as we step back and look at that first spark of inspiration, we are reminded that legends are not born overnight. They are crafted with care, imbued with the hopes and dreams of an entire generation. And Superman, with his quiet strength and unwavering commitment to justice, became more than a hero. He became a symbol of what humanity can achieve when it dares to imagine a brighter future. So, as you settle into a comfortable space and allow your mind to wander, consider the humble beginnings of this iconic figure. In every brushstroke of art and every carefully chosen word, there lies the essence of a timeless legend, a story that began in the heart of a struggling nation and grew to touch the lives of millions around the world. In the following parts, we will delve deeper into Superman's journey through the golden age of comics, explore the evolution of his powers and the expansion of his universe, and examine how he became the enduring symbol of hope we know today. For now, let the legacy of Superman's origins gently guide you into a place of reflection and calm, a reminder that even in the most challenging times, heroes can be born. Part 2. The Golden Age begins 1938 to 1950. As the final pages of Action Comics #1 circulated through newsstands and barbershops, something remarkable began to happen. The name Superman spread like wildfire, not just as a comic book character, but as a cultural force. Children flipped through panels wide-eyed. Adults paused, curious. A new kind of hero had arrived, and he was here to stay. This was the beginning of what would later be called the Golden Age of Comics, a time when superheroes first leapt from obscurity into the collective imagination of the world. And at the heart of it all stood Superman. Following his 1938 debut, Superman's popularity skyrocketed. Within just a year, he had his own self-titled comic book, Superman #1, a rarity for the time. Most characters lived as part of anthologies, but Superman, he was already special. DC, then called National Allied Publications, knew they had lightning in a bottle. His stories were simple, but powerful. Superman would save a man from being wrongfully executed, rescue workers from unsafe conditions, stop corrupt politicians. He didn't fight aliens or time travelers. Not yet. In the earliest years, he battled social injustice, greedy landlords, and abusive employers. He was a blue and red crusader for the everyman, and in that, he was revolutionary. This was the late 1930s, before World War II, before America had joined the fight. But the world was already on edge. In Europe, fascism was on the rise. In the U.S., tensions simmered beneath the surface. Superman became a symbol, not just of strength, but of what it meant to stand up to oppression. He was fiction, but his values felt very real. By the early 1940s, as America entered World War II, Superman's role shifted. He became a patriotic figure. His bright costume, his unwavering sense of justice, it all aligned perfectly with wartime propaganda. He appeared on posters urging citizens to buy war bonds. In the comics, he took on saboteurs, spies, and enemy forces, not in official combat, but in metaphor. It was clear who the villains were meant to represent, and audiences loved it. Superman was everywhere. On lunchboxes. On radio. Yes, radio. In 1940, The Adventures of Superman debuted as a radio serial, with actor Bud Collyer voicing the Man of Steel. This version of Superman reached an even broader audience, families gathering around the radio after dinner, hearing tales of Clark Kent and his secret life. It was here, on radio, not in the comics, where kryptonite was introduced for the first time. The green, glowing rock that could weaken the invincible Superman. Originally, it was a clever storytelling device, a way for voice actors to take time off while Superman lay weakened. But kryptonite quickly became part of the mythos, a symbol that even the strongest heroes have their weaknesses. The radio show also introduced listeners to a crucial addition to Superman's world, Jimmy Olsen, the plucky photographer who would become a fan favorite. Later, in 1941, another figure stepped into the spotlight. Perry White, the gruff editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, and Superman's boss in his day-to-day identity as Clark Kent. By this time, Superman's universe was expanding quickly. The Golden Age solidified many of the trademarks we now associate with the character. His iconic red cape, the S-shield, the dynamic poses, the leap, not flight, but leap, over tall buildings. In these early years, Superman couldn't fly yet. That would come later. For now, he could jump incredible distances, outrun trains, and bend steel bars, but he remained grounded, almost human, and that's what made him relatable. Clark Kent, the man behind the cape, was the key to Superman's enduring appeal. Unlike later heroes who embraced their powers fully, Clark was awkward, gentle, and often underestimated. A glasses-wearing journalist who played it safe in the office, hiding his secret strength beneath a humble smile. That duality, that tension between the godlike Superman and the mild-mannered Clark Kent, was brilliant storytelling. It reminded readers that appearances could be deceiving, that power and humility could live in the same person. As Superman's fame grew, so did the comic book industry. New heroes appeared, inspired by his success. Batman in 1939, Wonder Woman in 1941, The Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, a League of Legends born from Superman's shadow. He wasn't just a hero anymore. He was the template, the gold standard. In 1948, Superman finally made his first live-action appearance in a movie serial, Superman, starring Kirk Allen. Audiences saw a man become a blur, transforming from reporter to savior in black and white motion. The effects were simple, the costumes charmingly low budget. But it didn't matter. For a generation of fans, it was magic. And then came television. In 1952, actor George Reeves donned the cape for Adventures of Superman, one of the earliest superhero shows on TV. His version of Superman was smiling, kind, and dependable, a strong man with a strong moral compass. Kids across America tuned in weekly, inspired by his bravery and quiet wisdom. But behind the scenes, the creators who birthed Superman weren't smiling. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the original minds behind Superman, had sold the rights to their creation for just $130 in 1938. A one-time payment, no royalties, no credit. As Superman became a billion-dollar icon, they were left behind, struggling financially. Their battle for recognition would become a story of its own, one that echoed the very themes Superman stood for: justice, fairness, and doing what's right. But that's a tale for another time. For now, the golden age of Superman had accomplished something extraordinary. He had leapt from the page into the culture itself. He had weathered war, risen through new media, and inspired a nation to dream a little bigger. Superman wasn't just a comic book character anymore. He was a symbol, a myth, a friend, and this was only the beginning. Part 3. The Silver Age. Flight, fantasy, and a universe expands 1950 to 1970. By the dawn of the 1950s, Superman had already become a household name. But in the decades that followed, he would evolve into something even greater. A fully realized mythic figure with cosmic powers, new allies, bizarre villains, and an ever-deepening lore that reflected the wild imagination of the atomic age. This was the Silver Age of comics, a time when science fiction ruled the page, and Superman soared into strange new frontiers. No longer limited to leaping buildings, he now truly flew across the skies, thanks to a subtle change in storytelling and a growing interest in the fantastical. His powers expanded dramatically. Heat vision, freeze breath, telescopic sight, time travel, even the ability to juggle planets or survive in the vacuum of space. He became less grounded, more godlike, reflecting America's fascination with science, space, and what lay beyond Earth. His origin on Krypton was also redefined. Krypton was no longer just a dying planet. It became a cold, advanced society ruled by logic and isolation. We learned about his birth parents, Jor-El and Lara, and their desperate act of love as they sent their only son to Earth. Meanwhile, Superman's earthly family, Jonathan and Martha Kent, gained more emotional depth. In many versions, they passed away before Clark became Superman, reinforcing the theme of loss, of legacy. New characters enter the scene. Supergirl, his cousin Kara from Argo City, who shared his powers and struggles. Brainiac, a hyper-intelligent alien with cold ambition. Bizarro, a backwards-talking clone who wanted to do good in all the wrong ways. And then came the Rogues Gallery. Toyman, Metallo, Parasite, Mr. MXYZPTLK, a fifth-dimensional imp who appeared in bursts of chaos and had to be tricked into saying his name backward to vanish. The tone of the comics reflected the times, often campy, imaginative, surreal. Stories about Superman splitting into two versions of himself, or solving galactic puzzles, or being turned into a lion, or a baby, or even a villain under red kryptonite's influence. But through it all, Clark Kent remained a constant. He continued working at the Daily Planet, dodging Lois Lane's suspicions, maintaining the gentle balance between myth and man. Lois herself grew in importance. No longer just a damsel, she was a determined reporter, brave and persistent, often stepping into danger without waiting for Superman to save her. The Silver Age also gave us the iconic Fortress of Solitude, a crystalline refuge in the Arctic where Superman kept alien relics, trophies, and memories of Krypton. A place where he could be alone, a place to remember who he truly was. And in this era, Superman's role expanded beyond individual heroism. He became a founding member of the Justice League of America, teaming up with Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter. Together, they defended Earth from threats too great for any one hero to face. But beneath the cosmic stakes and vibrant artwork, Superman remained a symbol of hope. Whether stopping an asteroid or comforting a frightened child, his strength wasn't just physical, it was moral. The Silver Age Superman was unstoppable, yes, but always compassionate, always kind. In an era defined by Cold War anxiety, nuclear fears, and civil unrest, he represented something soothing, predictable, reassuring. And as readers turned each bright, bizarre page, they knew that no matter how strange things became, Superman would always make it right. Part 4. The Bronze Age and the Human Heart, 1970 to 1986. As the 1970s rolled in, the world was changing, gone with the rose-colored lenses of post-war optimism and atomic age fantasy. In their place came questions about authority, justice, identity, and the flaws of those we once believed were invincible. And as culture shifted, so too did Superman. The Bronze Age of comics arrived with a quieter, more thoughtful kind of heroism. It was no longer enough for Superman to punch robots or outsmart imps from the fifth dimension. Readers wanted to see the man behind the S. They wanted to know who Clark Kent really was, and what it cost to be Superman. This was a time when superheroes became more reflective, more vulnerable, and more real. The world was reckoning with war, political scandal, civil rights movements, and an increasingly cynical public. Against that backdrop, Superman stood tall, But now, he wasn't just a beacon of strength. He was learning how to feel. Writers like Denny O'Neil, Elliot S. Maggin, and Carrie Bates explored Clark Kent as more than a disguise. He wasn't just a quiet reporter anymore. He was a man constantly torn between two worlds, one that needed saving and one that needed him to live a normal life. He wanted love, connection, belonging. We saw Superman struggle with doubt. We saw him fail. We saw him question his own place in a world that sometimes no longer seemed to believe in heroes. His powers remained vast, but the stories slowed down, became more introspective. He talked to people more. He reflected. He listened. It wasn't just about saving the day. It was about understanding why the day needed saving at all. During this time, Lois Lane evolved too. No longer just the love-struck reporter chasing a scoop, she became fully realized, independent, strong-willed, and brave. Her dynamic with Superman deepened. There were moments of romance, yes, but also of conflict, misunderstanding, and growth. She began to suspect Clark's secret, but chose, more often than not, to see the man in front of her, not the mystery behind the glasses. New characters emerged with emotional weight. Steve Lombard, the brash sports reporter at the Daily Planet, became a comedic foil. Morgan Edge, a ruthless media mogul, bought out the planet and represented corporate control over truth, a theme that still resonates. And in the background, a deeper mythology continued to build. Krypton became more than just a lost planet. It became a place of tragedy and philosophical reflection. We learn more about Jor-El and Lara, their desperation, their love. Superman began to ask, was he more Kryptonian or more human? The tension between heritage and upbringing became a recurring question. Was Clark Kent a real identity, or was it Kal-El? Outside the comics, the world met a new Superman on the big screen. In 1978, director Richard Donner brought Superman, the movie, to life. It was bold, sweeping, emotional, and it gave us the definitive live-action Superman in Christopher Reeve. Reeve portrayed the duality of Clark and Superman with incredible grace. Awkward and gentle as Kent, noble and radiant as the Man of Steel. The film opened with Jor-El's booming words. They could be a great people, Kal-El, if they wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. With those words, Superman's mission was reframed. Not just to protect, but to inspire. The movie was a massive success. Audiences believed a man could fly. And more importantly, they believed in Superman's goodness. The film embraced sincerity in a time of growing cinematic cynicism. It gave the world something to believe in again. And Reeve would go on to portray Superman in 3 sequels, further cementing his place in pop culture history. Back in the comics, the 1980s brought even more complexity. Superman's enemies became more dangerous, more personal. General Zod returned, a fellow Kryptonian, but one who saw power as dominance rather than responsibility. Brainiac was reimagined from a green-skinned alien into a terrifying robotic intelligence. And Lex Luthor, Superman's greatest enemy, was redefined completely. No longer a mad scientist with a grudge, Luthor became a billionaire industrialist, a master manipulator who hid behind charm and philanthropy. In many ways, he represented the worst of humanity's potential: greed, vanity, cruelty. And yet, he walked among humans while Superman remained alien. This dynamic was powerful. Luthor didn't hate Superman because of what he did. He hated him because of what he was. A reminder that there was someone better, stronger, more trusted, more loved. And then, something happened that changed everything. By the mid-1980s, DC Comics faced a problem. Decades of storytelling had created multiple timelines, conflicting backstories, and overlapping versions of heroes. There were 2 Flashes, 2 Supergirls, entire alternate Earths. Readers were confused. New fans didn't know where to start. And so, DC made a bold decision. In 1985, they launched Crisis on Infinite Earths, a massive, universe-spanning crossover that would reset the DC universe. Entire worlds would be destroyed, characters would die, histories would be rewritten, and Superman would be reborn. But before that rebirth, one last story needed to be told. In 1986, legendary writer and artist Alan Moore wrote Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, a two-part farewell to the Silver and Bronze Age Superman. Set in the near future, it imagined the final days of Superman's life, the last battles, the last sacrifices, the final choice to give up his powers and disappear. It was bittersweet, poetic. It closed the book on an era where Superman was near godlike, untouchable, perfect, and made way for something new. Because what came next would change Superman forever. Part 5, Crisis and the Modern Rebirth, 1986 to 1993. The sky cracked open. Worlds collided. Heroes died. In 1985, DC Comics launched Crisis on Infinite Earths, a cataclysmic event designed to clean house, to merge the multiverse into a single, streamlined continuity. For Superman, it was more than just another storyline. It was a death and a rebirth, the end of one era and the beginning of another. In the aftermath, DC turned to writer and artist John Byrne to rebuild Superman from the ground up. His 6-issue miniseries, The Man of Steel, released in 1986, rewrote the myth for a modern audience, grounded, humanized, and stripped of the baggage that had piled up over decades. This was not the godlike figure who juggled planets or created miniature versions of himself. This was a more intimate Clark Kent, one with limits, with emotion, with conflict. Byrne's Superman was born on Krypton, yes, but that Krypton was reimagined as a cold, sterile world where emotion had been suppressed. Kal-El was not born in a laboratory, but in a birthing matrix, rocketed to Earth before ever breathing Kryptonian air. In a symbolic sense, Clark Kent was his true identity, not just a disguise. Raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent in the heartland of Kansas, Clark's powers emerged slowly, naturally. His humanity was emphasized. His morality came not from alien heritage, but from home. This version of Superman was powerful, but not all-powerful. He couldn't move planets. He could be hurt. He had to push himself. His relationship with Lois Lane was rewritten, too. She was strong, smart, and competitive, and for once, not obsessed with discovering his secret. Their bond would grow slowly, over time, with real tension and tenderness. And Lex Luthor? He was no longer a wild-haired madman. Byrne transformed him into a ruthless corporate tycoon, Metropolis' wealthiest man, hiding malevolence behind a facade of respectability. He was the American dream gone sour, greedy, manipulative, and most dangerously believable. The world around Superman became more grounded, more political. Stories tackled media manipulation, economic inequality, and international conflict. Superman became a figure of inspiration, yes, but also controversy. Some feared his power, some worshipped it, and Superman himself often questioned where the line should be drawn. Was he a protector or a god? A peacekeeper or a deterrent? Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, the creative team, especially writer Dan Jurgens, artist Jerry Ordway, and editor Mike Carlin, expanded the mythos with layered, character-driven stories. We met supporting characters like Cat Grant, a reporter balancing motherhood and ambition. Professor Emil Hamilton, a scientist helping Superman understand his powers. And of course, Perry White, the gruff editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, who became a father figure in Clark's adult life. Superman's adventures weren't just cosmic battles anymore. They were deeply human. He wrestled with loneliness, with legacy, with the burden of always needing to be more. In one story, he discovers a room full of birthday presents from his parents, carefully wrapped each year before they died. In another, he spent a full issue simply trying to save a suicidal woman on a rooftop. No fights, no villains, just words, compassion, hope. But just as Superman was settling into this more mature, emotionally complex identity, DC decided to shake the earth. In 1992, the unthinkable happened. Superman died. The death of Superman wasn't just a story. It was a cultural earthquake. Across 7 issues, Superman faced a hulking, unstoppable monster named Doomsday. The fight was brutal, cinematic, drawn out across the American heartland and the streets of Metropolis. And in the end, Superman gave everything. No tricks, no secret escapes, just a man refusing to give up, even as every bone in his body broke. He died in Lois Lane's arms, on national television. The final panel was a torn cape fluttering like a flag. The world mourned. So did the world outside the comics. News stations covered it. Fans lined up at midnight. Black armbands were sold. Superman's death became a global headline, a cultural moment. For many, it was the first time comics felt real, not just fantasy, but myth with weight. But of course, death is never the end. What followed was funeral for a friend, a slow, somber aftermath that explored grief on every level. Lois, broken and angry. The Kents, devastated in Kansas. Metropolis, lost without its guardian. Heroes across the DC universe gathered. Tributes poured in. Statues were built. And in the shadows, mysteries began to unfold. Because then came the next phase, Reign of the Supermen. 4 figures appeared, each claiming Superman's legacy. The cyborg Superman, half man, half machine, with a dark secret. The Eradicator, a cold Kryptonian program who believed in justice without mercy. Superboy, a cocky teen clone with a lot to prove. Steel, a man in powered armor, inspired by Superman's sacrifice. Each reflected a different facet of what Superman stood for: truth, justice, power, and legacy. And through their eyes, we saw how the world responded to the idea of Superman, even in his absence. But of course, the real Superman wasn't truly gone. He had been healing, slowly recovering in a Kryptonian regeneration matrix. When he returned, it wasn't with a triumphant shout, but with humility. A black suit, no cape, long hair, and questions. Was he still the same man? Had the world moved on? The death and return of Superman became one of the most iconic arcs in comic history, not just for its scale, but for what it said about loss, identity, and how legends endure. Superman didn't just survive. He evolved, and the world was watching. Part 6, The Voice of a Generation. Superman in animation and live action 1990 to 2000. The cape didn't just fly in comics anymore. In the 1990s, Superman soared into living rooms, no longer confined to the printed page, but fully alive in motion, voice, and color. This was the era when an entire generation didn't just read Superman. They heard him, saw him, felt him. And for many, their Superman didn't come from comic shop. He came from Saturday morning television. It began with a bold vision: Superman, the animated series. Premiering in 1996, the series was created by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, the same minds behind the iconic Batman, the animated series. But this wasn't Gotham. This was Metropolis, bright, futuristic, and hopeful. The show took inspiration from the Fleischer cartoons of the 1940s, blending old-school Art Deco style with clean modern storytelling. And at the center of it all was Tim Daly's voice, warm, steady, heroic, not booming or exaggerated, just calm, kind, human. This Superman was the ultimate balance of strength and restraint. He could stop meteors, battle aliens, and lift buildings, but he was always gentle first, always asking before acting. His Clark Kent wasn't bumbling or goofy. He was a thoughtful journalist, a man who listened more than he spoke. And the show gave real space to Lois Lane, voiced by Dana Delaney, sharp, fearless, funny. Their chemistry was electric but never rushed. It built slowly, over seasons, like real people falling in love under the weight of their shared responsibilities. And then there was Lex. Clancy Brown's Lex Luthor was smooth, sophisticated, and terrifying. Not a cackling villain, but a powerful corporate kingpin. Calm in every scene, dangerous in every word. He didn't need to throw punches. He bought newspapers, manipulated governments, built weapons behind closed doors. And that made him even more dangerous. The series didn't shy away from emotion. One episode showed Superman losing his memory, raised by a simple farmer family, believing himself to be human. Another focused on a young boy who died, with Superman comforting the grieving parents. It wasn't always action. It was about heart, ethics, hope. The show lasted only 3 seasons, but its legacy was permanent. It expanded into the wider DC animated universe. Justice League Unlimited, where Superman became the moral center of a team of gods. His character deepened. He lost patience. He made mistakes. He feared his own power. And yet, he always chose restraint. He chose humanity. At the same time, a different kind of Superman story was unfolding, one without the cape. In 2001, Smallville premiered. 10 seasons, over 200 episodes. And not once did Clark Kent wear the iconic suit. Smallville wasn't a show about Superman. It was a show about becoming him. Set in the rural heart of Kansas, the series followed a teenage Clark, played by Tom Welling, as he grappled with secrets, friendships, crushes, and the burden of being different. He saved people in secret, hid his powers, struggled with destiny. It was part superhero origin, part high school drama, and all heart. The show took its time. Each season peeled back a new layer. His Kryptonian heritage, the mystery of the Luthors, the secret lab experiments, the destiny symbols written in alien languages. Lex, played by Michael Rosenbaum, was a standout, charismatic, curious, and slowly corrupted. His friendship with Clark was deep, complicated, tragic. You wanted them to stay allies. You knew they couldn't. Jonathan and Martha Kent, played by John Schneider and Annette O'Toole, gave Clark his foundation, his compass. They didn't just tell him to do good. They lived it. Every time Clark doubted himself, it was his parents, especially his father, who reminded him that strength isn't in the fists. It's in the choices. And then there was Lana and Chloe, and eventually Lois. The show evolved from a teenage romance into a complex tale of fate, identity, and sacrifice. By the final season, Clark was ready to fly, to embrace the name, to become the symbol. And when he finally opened the shirt and revealed the S, it was earned. Meanwhile, in the world of animation, Superman kept showing up in unexpected places. He crossed over with Batman, fought alongside the Flash, faced gods and monsters in Justice League Unlimited. But always, he came back to his core. The boy from Kansas with a heart too big for the sky. This era didn't just preserve Superman. It reforged him for a new generation. A generation that needed hope in a post-9/11 world. That needed strength that didn't punch down. That needed to believe that someone could have all the power in the world and still be kind. Superman had a voice again, and it spoke softly but clearly. I'm always around. Part 7. The Silver Screen returns. Superman in film 2000 to 2010. By the early 2000s, Superman had become a myth living in the collective memory, a symbol seen more in nostalgia than in theaters. It had been nearly 2 decades since Christopher Reeve last wore the cape, and Hollywood faced a daunting question. How do you bring back a god? The answer, in 2006, was Superman Returns. Directed by Bryan Singer, this film wasn't a reboot, it was a love letter. A direct continuation of the Reeve era, carefully crafted to echo its tone and spirit. Brandon Routh stepped into the red boots, not as a new Superman, but as a quiet echo of the old. His performance was gentle, restrained, less a man of action, more ghost. The plot was somber. Superman returns to Earth after a long absence, only to find a world has moved on. Lois has a child. She's engaged. The Daily Planet is buzzing with news that maybe the world doesn't need a savior anymore. And Lex Luthor, played by Kevin Spacey, is back with a plan to reshape the world, literally, by growing a new continent out of kryptonite. It was operatic, moody, contemplative. Some fans loved the quiet elegance. Others wanted more punch, more presence. The box office didn't deliver a clear win. And so, Warner Brothers paused, waited, wondered what Superman was supposed to mean in a modern age where heroes were less myth, more flawed. Then came 2013, a new era, a darker world, a new vision, Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder, produced by Christopher Nolan, written by David S. Goyer. This was no echo of the past. It was a full reimagining. No John Williams theme, no red trunks, just raw energy, grit, emotion. Henry Cavill stepped into the role, his Superman forged in silence and conflict. The story reframed Krypton not as a sterile place of peace, but a world undone by pride and science gone too far. Russell Crowe played Jor-El, noble and tragic, while Michael Shannon's General Zod brought an unrelenting force, both philosophical and physical. Krypton fell not just because of natural disaster, but because its people had lost their way. Kal-El was sent to Earth, not just as a refugee, but as a chance. We saw Clark's childhood through flashbacks, moments of pain, isolation, confusion. Kevin Costner's Jonathan Kent urged caution, even secrecy. You have to keep this side of yourself a secret, he told his son, or they'll fear you. It was a hard message. Controversial, even, but it reflected a real-world fear. How do we respond to those we don't understand? Diane Lane's Martha Kent was warm, grounding, always reminding Clark, you don't owe the world anything, but you can choose who you want to be. And when Clark finally embraced the S on his chest, we learned it stood for hope, not in English, but in Kryptonian. The first flight sequence was breathtaking. Sonic booms, sweeping vistas, a man discovering his place between heaven and earth. And then came the battle, Zod's arrival, the destruction of Metropolis, the moral weight of power. Superman wasn't fighting for the world's approval. He was earning it moment by brutal moment. When he killed Zod to save innocent lives, it divided audiences. Some saw betrayal. Others saw a painful lesson. Even gods must sometimes make impossible choices. This Superman didn't smile easily. He wasn't beloved yet, but he was becoming. And then came the next step, Batman v Superman. Dawn of Justice, 2016. Not just a sequel, but a mythological clash. Snyder painted his canvas with shadows and fire. Henry Cavill's Superman stood as a messianic figure, admired, feared, questioned. Statues were built. Protesters marched. Lex Luthor, now played by Jesse Eisenberg, manipulated the fear. He spoke in riddles and schemes, blurring the line between madness and insight. He didn't need kryptonite alone. He needed the world to doubt its savior. Enter Bruce Wayne, scarred by loss, haunted by alien power. Ben Affleck's Batman wasn't just a vigilante. He was a man pushed to the edge by trauma and paranoia. The fight between the two was tragic, inevitable. Not good versus evil, but two damaged men trying to protect the world in their own broken ways. And at its climax, Superman's humanity shone through. Save Martha. The name echoed like a thunderclap. Not just a meme, but a reminder that even gods have mothers. That pain is shared. That mercy matters. Superman sacrifices himself to stop Doomsday. He dies not as a weapon, but as a man who loved. Justice League followed in 2017, but not without chaos. Snyder stepped away during post-production after a personal tragedy. Joss Whedon was brought in. Reshoots were made. The tone shifted. The result was disjointed. The Superman who returned felt strange. Digitally altered smiles, shallow dialogue. The resurrection lacked weight. Fans felt cheated. But in 2021, Zack Snyder's Justice League restored the vision. A 4-hour epic. Sweeping. Mythic. Cavill's Superman returned in the black suit. A symbol of rebirth. Silent. Steady. He no longer doubted who he was. He was the hero now. The center of the league. The heart of the world. Through these films, Superman was challenged. Not just with enemies, but with meaning. What does it mean to be a god in a world full of fear? What does it cost to care? To sacrifice? To hope? This was not the smiling Boy Scout of yesterday. This was a Superman for an age of anxiety. But at his core, he still believed. Still stood. Still chose kindness. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. From quiet returns to cosmic battles, The Man of Steel once again became a mirror for our fears, our flaws, our ideals. And he kept flying forward. Part 8, Modern Comics and the Multiverse. Superman in print 2000 to 2020. In the ever-evolving world of comic books, the 2000s and 2010s marked a turning point for Superman, where old mythologies met modern anxieties and multiverses became the playground for reinvention. After decades of continuity resets, DC Comics entered a phase of both experimentation and reverence. The early 2000s brought in storylines that stripped Superman down to his moral core. Writers like Jeff Loeb and Joe Kelly crafted tales where Superman was less about punching meteors and more about choosing the right thing in impossible situations. In For Tomorrow, we saw a deeply introspective Man of Steel grappling with the loss of a million lives he couldn't save, questioning not just his power, but his purpose. Meanwhile, books like Superman, Birthright reimagined his origin for a new generation, blending science fiction with heartfelt humanity. In this retelling, Clark Kent was not just a Kansas farm boy, but a global soul searcher, someone who traveled the world before embracing the cape. The story added depth to his compassion, showing that Superman doesn't just protect Earth, he belongs to it. And then came 2011, and with it, the New 52, a complete reboot of the DC universe. In this version, Superman was younger, more brash, and emotionally distant. A god in the making, not yet the man of hope we once knew. His parents were gone. His relationship with Lois Lane reset. He even dated Wonder Woman. For some readers, it was a bold reinvention. For others, it stripped away what made him relatable. But even in this modern rework, writers explored rich, symbolic ground. His loneliness, his moral dilemmas, his alienation from both Krypton and Earth. In arcs like Truth, his identity was exposed to the public, forcing Clark to live openly as Superman for the first time. It was a bold move, asking whether the world could accept a hero without the mask of humility. And then came Rebirth in 2016, a course correction that blended the best of old and new. DC brought back the pre-New 52 Superman, a wiser, married version of the hero, along with his wife Lois and their young son, Jonathan Kent. Suddenly, Superman was not just a savior, he was a father. And in that role, he found new dimensions, teaching John about right and wrong, balancing responsibility with love, watching a boy grow into a hero. This wasn't just a story about Superman, it was a story about legacy, about what happens when a god raises a child with hope. John Kent eventually took on the Superman mantle himself in Son of Kal-El, giving readers a fresh lens through which to explore courage, activism, and identity in a world filled with nuance. And outside of the main timeline, the multiverse blossomed. Superman, Red Sun asked, what if Kal-El's rocket had landed in the Soviet Union? In this twisted timeline, Superman grew up under Stalin's shadow, becoming a symbol of state power rather than individual freedom. The story didn't just flip the colors, it challenged the very idea of nature versus nurture. Was Superman inherently good, or was he shaped by the soil he landed on? Kingdom Come offered another perspective, a dystopian future where Superman withdraws from a world that no longer values his ideals, only to return older, wiser, more powerful, to remind humanity what heroism really means. These Elseworlds tales gave writers the freedom to stretch the mythos, to ask questions that mainline continuity couldn't always explore. Meanwhile, Action Comics number 1000 celebrated 8 decades of storytelling. Writers from across generations returned to pen love letters to the character, reminding us why Superman endured, why he still mattered, why, even in an age of antiheroes, gritty realism, and moral gray areas, there was still room for a man who simply wants to do what's right. In these years, Superman was many things: a refugee, a father, a rebel, a symbol, a beacon. He fought aliens, gods, and tyrants. He questioned his role. He doubted himself, but he never stopped trying. Comics became not just stories, but mirrors, reflecting society's hopes fears, and shifting values. In a world of division, Superman remained the ideal, flawed but striving, gentle but unyielding, alone yet never above. And as the pages turned from print to digital, from issue to issue, one thing remained true. Superman's story was never just about power. It was about choice. The choice to care, to act, to believe, no matter the timeline, no matter the earth, no matter the odds. And through every retelling, reboot, and reinvention, that symbol on his chest still meant one thing, above all else: hope. Part 9, Superman in Animation and Television, the voice of a generation. Across decades, screens flickered to life with the sound of soaring horns, bold narration, and a voice that made even the most cynical viewer believe a man could fly. Not in theaters, but in living rooms, bedrooms, and after-school slots. Superman's legacy in animation and television is not just a companion to his comic book journey. It's a defining force, shaping entire generations who may have never picked up an issue of Action Comics. It began in the 1940s with the legendary Fleischer cartoons, lushly animated, dramatically scored, and visually ahead of their time. In those shorts, Superman battled mad scientists, robots, and natural disasters in a style that would influence everything from Batman, the animated series, to modern superhero aesthetics. Fast forward to the 1950s and 60s, and we arrive at The Adventures of Superman, a live-action series starring George Reeves. Though modest in budget, it etched itself into pop culture. The black and white image of Reeves leaping from windows and catching criminals shaped public perception of the character for years. Reeves' portrayal wasn't just about might. It was warmth, reassurance. He looked like someone who would save a cat from a tree and smile while doing it. In the 1970s and 80s, Superman entered Saturday morning cartoons with Super Friends, an ensemble of heroes led by a square-jawed, morally upright Superman who taught kids teamwork and kindness. While the tone was light and sometimes campy, the presence of Superman at the team's core reinforced his status as the ultimate leader and moral compass. But it was in the 1990s, during the golden age of superhero animation, that Superman returned with quiet strength and serious heart. Superman, the animated series from creators Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, gave the world a modern, grounded Kal-El who struggled with identity, justice, and power, not through fistfights alone, but through diplomacy, sacrifice, and restraint. Voiced by Tim Daly, this Superman wasn't invincible. He bled. He lost. He learned. The show honored the mythos of the comics, introducing Brainiac, Darkseid, and Lex Luthor in deeply personal ways, while crafting emotional arcs that explored loneliness, duty, and compassion. It also tied into a larger animated universe, one that would culminate in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, where Superman's leadership was tested against gods, tyrants, and even his closest allies. The writing matured, the stakes grew, and the Superman of this era evolved into someone burdened by power, yet never ruled by it. One of the most iconic episodes for the man who has everything, adapted from Alan Moore's story, portrayed Superman trapped in a fantasy where Krypton never exploded, offering a glimpse into his deepest desire and the painful realization that even paradise couldn't replace his commitment to Earth. Beyond animation, television brought us Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman in the 1990s, a romantic drama starring Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. It leaned into the human side of Clark Kent, exploring relationships, careers, and identity in a pre-CGI world. Fans connected with a Superman who cooked dinner, worried about his job, and still managed to save the day. But perhaps no show shaped modern Superman more than Smallville, which ran for 10 seasons from 2001 to 2011. Starring Tom Welling, the show chronicled Clark's teenage years in Kansas. Before the cape, before the name, before the legend. No flights, no tights was the rule, yet audiences stuck around for a full decade, watching Clark wrestle with his origins, friendships, and fears. It introduced a new generation to Lex Luthor, portrayed by Michael Rosenbaum as a layered, tragic figure. It laid the groundwork for serialized superhero storytelling on TV. And most importantly, It made Superman earn his destiny, showing how a farm boy becomes a symbol not through power alone, but through choice, love, and loss. As the 2010s unfolded, Superman adapted again. He appeared in shows like Supergirl as both inspiration and ally. Tyler Hoechlin's version, debuting first as a guest and eventually starring in Superman and Lois, offered a grounded, heartfelt portrayal of Clark Kent not just as a hero, but as a father navigating the complexities of family life while facing alien threats and moral dilemmas. This Superman juggled responsibilities at home and in the sky, reflecting a more modern, relatable man beneath the S. Meanwhile, animation continued to evolve. Films like All-Star Superman, Superman vs. the Elite, and The Death of Superman brought iconic comic arcs to life in faithful, often emotional adaptations. And younger audiences met Kal-El through Justice League Action or My Adventures with Superman, a fresh anime-inspired take that reintroduced Clark, Lois, and Jimmy as young, curious adults discovering who they are. These versions kept the character alive, not as a static ideal, but as a story always being retold for whoever needed him most. From VHS tapes to streaming platforms, from cel-shaded frames to high-definition CGI, Superman has never left our screens for long. And through every transformation, whether it's the stoic giant of the Justice League, the awkward reporter in Love, or the boy from Smallville chasing the stars, one thing never changed: the voice. The voice that calms chaos, that lifts the fallen, that speaks not to our fears, but to our potential. Superman's journey through animation and television isn't just a history of appearances. It's a testament to his flexibility, his timelessness, and his power to inspire. Because whether he's drawn with a pencil, filmed in grainy black and white, or voiced by a cast of legends, he remains what he's always been: a light in the dark, a friend when we feel alone, a reminder that greatness isn't about how high you can fly. It's about how deeply you care. Part 10, Superman in Film. From Reeve to Cavill and beyond. When it comes to cinematic myth-making, few figures loom as large as Superman. His journey on the silver screen mirrors the evolution of not only superhero films, but of pop culture itself, shifting with the times, reflecting hopes, fears, and the constant search for a hero who could save more than just cities, but souls. It began in earnest with 1978's Superman, the movie, a landmark event in film history. Directed by Richard Donner and starring Christopher Reeve, this was more than a movie. It was a promise. The tagline said it all: "You'll believe a man can fly." With sweeping orchestral scores from John Williams and a story that honored myth as much as modernity, Reeve's Superman redefined the superhero for the big screen. He played both Clark Kent and Kal-El with such heart, humor, and nobility that audiences instantly believed in the impossible. The film introduced millions to the origin of Superman, the fall of Krypton, the wholesome upbringing in Smallville, and the fateful flight into Metropolis as a caped savior. Lex Luthor, portrayed by Gene Hackman, brought a blend of menace and charisma. But the real magic wasn't just in the flying scenes. It was in the eyes of Reeve, in the way he smiled at Lois, in the quiet strength he brought to each rescue. Superman 2 followed, delving into moral complexity. Should Superman give up his powers for love? And what happens when he faces enemies, like General Zod, who are his equals? The conflict between duty and desire deepened the character. However, the series faltered with Superman 3 and 4, weighed down by uneven tone, declining budgets, and studio interference. By the late 1980s, the cinematic Superman had vanished into nostalgia until the early 2000s brought a resurgence. 2006's Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, attempted to resurrect the spirit of the Reeve films while adding new layers. Brandon Routh stepped into the cape, portraying a Superman who had left Earth and returned to a world that had moved on. It was moody, melancholic, and deeply introspective. Some praised its emotional ambition. Others criticized its lack of action. But at its heart, it was a love letter, a film about longing, legacy, and the burden of being needed by everyone, yet loved by no one. Then came the era of Zack Snyder and the DCU, a bold, divisive reinvention. 2013's Man of Steel starred Henry Cavill as a more grounded, conflicted Superman. Gone was the warm optimism of Reeve. This Kal-El was a wanderer, a protector haunted by doubt. Snyder reimagined the origin once again. Krypton became a dystopian techno-civilization. Jor-El, a warrior scientist. Jonathan Kent, played by Kevin Costner, urged Clark to hide his powers, even if it meant letting people die. This moral ambiguity shocked some, but reflected a post-9/11 world. Uncertain, fragile, desperate for guidance. Superman was now a god in a skeptical world. The film climaxed in destruction. Superman's battle with Zod, leveling much of Metropolis, and ending in a controversial moment where he kills to save innocence. For some, this broke the myth. For others, it showed his humanity, that even Superman must make impossible choices. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, 2016, expanded the vision, exploring the world's reaction to Superman's existence. Some saw him as a savior, others as a threat. Bruce Wayne, scarred by the collateral damage, plotted to destroy him. The film presented Kal-El as a Christ-like figure, mourned, worshipped, misunderstood. It was operatic, visually stunning, and philosophically dense. Henry Cavill's Superman spoke little but felt much, his eyes heavy with loneliness, his posture always poised between kindness and fear. The film culminated in sacrifice, Superman dying to stop Doomsday, a death echoing the 1990s comic arc. He died not as a god, but as a man who gave everything. Justice League followed, but the 2017 theatrical release, altered by Joss Whedon, failed to honor Snyder's vision. Superman's resurrection felt rushed, his arc flattened. It wasn't until 2021's Zack Snyder's Justice League that fans saw the full, intended journey. In this 4-hour epic, Superman's return was treated with awe and reverence. Clad in a black suit, he didn't just return to life. He transcended. He united the League. He became a symbol of hope once more. Yet even with fan support, uncertainty clouded Cavill's future. Talks of sequels stalled. Rumors flew. Then, in 2022, after a surprise cameo in Black Adam, fans hoped for his return, only for DC Studios, now under James Gunn and Peter Safran, to announce a reboot. The upcoming film, Superman, Legacy, will feature a new actor, a new tone, and a fresh start. This new Superman promises to blend youthful optimism with modern sensibility, written and directed by Gunn himself. It marks the beginning of a new DC universe, and once again, Superman stands at the center. Through it all, from Reeves' timeless charm to Cavill's stoic nobility, from hopeful flights to apocalyptic battles, Superman's cinematic journey has always wrestled with one question. How do you portray a god as a man? In every era, the answer changes. Sometimes he's an alien seeking family. Sometimes a journalist chasing truth. Sometimes a symbol torn between worlds. But no matter the actor, the style, or the decade, Superman's message endures. He is the dream of what we could be, not perfect but striving, not all-powerful but always willing. A man who sees the world not as it is, but as it should be. And as long as cameras roll, and stories are told, and darkness threatens to overtake the light, someone, somewhere will don the cape, and remind us to look up. Part 11. Alternate Earths and Elseworlds. Multiverse Myths and What-Ifs. In the vast tapestry of Superman's history, few chapters are as rich, imaginative, and endlessly fascinating as his journeys across the multiverse. Those countless alternate realities where the familiar becomes strange, the heroic becomes tragic, and the myth of Superman is reimagined again and again. These Elseworld stories and multiverse variants allow writers and artists to ask bold questions. What if Superman landed in Soviet Russia instead of Kansas? What if he never became a hero? What if he ruled the world instead of saving it? And what if he never existed at all? These aren't just gimmicks. They're reflections of culture, philosophy, and humanity itself, seen through the eyes of the world's most iconic hero. One of the most acclaimed of these stories is Superman, Red Son, a brilliant reimagining written by Mark Miller, in which Kal-El's rocket lands not in the American heartland, but in the Soviet Union. Raised under communist ideology, Superman becomes a champion of Stalin, a symbol of state power, reshaping the Cold War in terrifying and thought-provoking ways. Yet even here, his core morality flickers. He still seeks to do good, though the definition of good is shaped by ideology. Across the sea, Lex Luthor becomes an American counterbalance, brilliant, ruthless, driven by his own form of patriotism. Their battle isn't just physical, it's ideological. And in the end, the story bends towards something greater, a timeless twist on fate, and the notion that Superman, no matter the soil he lands on, remains tethered to justice in some form. Then there's Kingdom Come, a haunting epic set in a future where the old heroes have retired, and the new generation is reckless, violent, and dangerous. Superman, now a distant and broken figure, has withdrawn from humanity after being betrayed by the world he once protected. But when chaos overtakes the planet, he returns, older, wiser, and determined to bring order, even if it means facing his old friends. Written by Mark Waid and painted by Alex Ross in breathtaking detail, Kingdom Come explores generational conflict, power, and legacy. Superman is no longer the hopeful farm boy. He is a myth in crisis, a god reckoning with his own relevance. It asks, what happens when the symbol outlives its meaning? Yet even here, in the ashes of conflict, Superman leads not with fear, but with restraint, showing that true strength lies in holding back, in listening, in choosing peace when war is easy. In All-Star Superman, penned by Grant Morrison, we see a love letter to the myth. This version is bright, bold, and almost poetic. After being exposed to extreme solar radiation, Superman learns he is dying. But instead of despairing, he sets out to perform 12 final labors, mirroring the myth of Hercules. He heals a dying son, tames time itself, and even forgives his enemies. The story isn't about battles or villains, but legacy. What do we leave behind? What does it mean to be a good person when no one is watching? Morrison's Superman is godlike, yes, but deeply human. He cries, he loves, he fears the void, and in his final act, he doesn't rage against death, he embraces it, leaving behind a legend brighter than any star. There are darker tales, too. In Injustice, Gods Among Us, Superman experiences unthinkable loss. The Joker tricks him into killing Lois Lane and their unborn child. Something snaps. He declares that Earth will never suffer again and begins a brutal, authoritarian reign. Heroes divide. Friends become enemies. Superman becomes the tyrant. It's chilling, but understandable, because even gods have limits. In this world, we see the fragility of heroism, how quickly it can fracture under grief. And yet, beneath the steel exterior, even this Superman aches with guilt, with longing. He did not fall willingly. He fell out of love, out of pain. Elseworld stories stretch further still. In Superman, Speeding Bullets, Kal-El is raised by the Waynes, becoming a fusion of Batman's trauma and Superman's power. In Superman, Secret Identity, a boy named Clark Kent in our real world discovers he actually has powers, blending metafiction with intimate storytelling. And in Earth 2, we see a world where Superman dies, only to return not as a savior, but as a weapon. These are not throwaway stories. They're mirrors, each one reflecting a different aspect of the character. Fear, compassion, power, doubt, hope. Even in parody or pastiche, Superman endures. Across thousands of universes, he fights dragons, becomes a robot, leads armies, or even raises a family. In Superman, American Alien. We follow Clark Kent not as a flawless savior, but as a messy, confused young man discovering who he is across different stages of life. It's raw, funny, painful, and deeply real. Through all these stories, one thing becomes clear. Superman is not confined to one origin, one costume, or one timeline. He is a mythical constant, able to bend, evolve, and reflect the fears and dreams of whatever world he inhabits. He can be a tyrant, a poet, a warrior, a father, or a stranger from another world. But in the end, he always circles back to one truth, that with great power comes the choice to do good. The multiverse doesn't dilute Superman, it deepens him, because every version is just another voice in a choir of hope. A symbol that no matter where we come from, no matter how strange our world becomes, there is always a version of us that can rise, that can stand for others, that can choose to believe in something better. In the endless hall of mirrors that is the multiverse, Superman is not just a man of steel, he is the steel within all of us. Part 12. The Man of Tomorrow, Rebirth, Legacy, and the Modern Myth. In the shifting dawn of the 21st century, Superman found himself standing not just as a relic of the past, but as a living myth whose story kept folding into new beginnings. An endless rebirth, shaped by each new generation's hopes, fears, and questions. As comic books evolved to reflect a more complex and chaotic world, so too did Superman, moving between reinvention and return, between human frailty and godlike grandeur. In 2011, DC Comics launched the New 52, a bold reboot meant to modernize every hero, including the Man of Steel. In this new continuity, Superman was younger, edgier, more isolated. His relationship with Lois Lane was reset, his parents were dead, and his costume, now armored and alien, reflected a world where optimism had become harder to trust. Writers explored his alien side more deeply. Was Clark Kent just a mask? Was Superman truly of Earth, or merely on it? The stories asked tougher questions, but the reception was mixed. Some readers missed the warmth, the heart, the gentle farm boy behind the cape. And so, in a rare moment of narrative course correction, DC brought back the pre-Flashpoint Superman, the one who had married Lois Lane, who had died and returned, who had loved Earth not as a protector, but as a son. This Superman, now older and wiser, lived quietly with Lois and their young son, Jonathan Kent, hiding in the shadows of a world that no longer remembered him. This arc, known as Rebirth, reintroduced legacy into Superman's world, not just as a theme, but as a reality. The new Superman didn't just punch meteors or stop wars. He raised a child, worried about homework, showed up at parent-teacher meetings. And Jonathan Kent, their son, became Superboy, a wide-eyed, powerful young boy trying to live up to a legacy he barely understood. Through him, readers were reminded of the awe and terror of discovering you're capable of great things, and the gentle, grounding hand of a father who's been through it all. Together, Clark and John reflected a new kind of story, not just about saving the world, but about nurturing it. This era gave rise to new questions. What does Superman mean in an age of cynicism? How do you balance raw strength with gentle fatherhood? Can the world's greatest hero be vulnerable, be unsure, and still be super? The answer was yes. And in stories like Superman, Up in the Sky, written by Tom King, we saw a more poetic, distilled version of the myth. In it, Superman hears about a kidnapped girl lost somewhere in the universe. He doesn't hesitate. He leaves everything behind, his job, his wife, his home, to chase a whisper of hope across galaxies. He fights, yes, but more importantly, he endures. He climbs and bleeds and loses. And through it all, he keeps asking, is one life worth it? The answer, again and again, is yes. Because Superman doesn't save people because it's easy, or because he has powers. He saves people because it's right, because it matters, even when no one sees it, even when no one will thank him. And it's in those quiet, personal moments that the myth feels most real. Not when he lifts planets, but when he comforts a stranger, listens to a grieving friend, forgives an enemy. The modern Superman is a paradox, timeless and evolving, grounded yet cosmic. He exists in animation, in film, in comics, in novels, even in video games like Injustice and Fortnite, reshaped again and again for each new audience. But his story always returns to its roots, a boy from Kansas who believes in helping people. And now, as the story turns toward the future, Superman's mantle begins to be shared. Jonathan Kent has taken up the title in many modern comics, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. A new Superman for a new world. Queer, compassionate, unshackled from old expectations, fighting climate change, standing against political injustice, redefining heroism for the Gen Z era. And while some critics see this as change too fast, others see it as growth, a torch passed, not dropped. Because the S on his chest was never just about one man. It's about what we strive to be. The myth adapts because we do, and that's the magic of Superman. He's not one version. He's a mirror, a lens, a guiding star that adjusts its glow with the times. Whether in the hands of Jerry Siegel, Grant Morrison, or a new young fan writing fan fiction late at night, Superman remains a blank canvas filled with truth and courage and quiet, radiant hope. In every reboot, every resurrection, every retelling, Superman lives again. Not because of his strength, but because of his kindness. Because in a world that often forgets how to be gentle, he reminds us that strength and compassion are not opposites. They are inseparable. He teaches us that doing the right thing, especially when it's hard, is the truest form of heroism. And so, the man who fell to Earth in a rocket from Krypton continues to rise again and again, not just in comics, but in our collective imagination. Forever the man of tomorrow. Forever the symbol of what we can be. Part 13, The Silver Screen Legacy, From Reeve to Cavill, a cinematic icon. From the flickering light of cinema projectors to the crystal clarity of modern digital screens, Superman's journey in film has been nothing short of epic. A legacy that has stretched across decades, technologies, and cultural shifts, shaping the world's perception of what a hero looks and sounds like. It began in the 1940s with animated theatrical shorts by Fleischer Studios, which captured the bold, Art Deco dynamism of Superman's early years. His strong jawline, the way he leapt rather than flew, the classic "this looks like a job for Superman," that would echo through the halls of time. But it wasn't until 1978 that the world would truly believe a man could fly. Directed by Richard Donner and starring the unshakably sincere Christopher Reeve, Superman. The movie brought Kal-El to life in a way that balanced myth and man, grandeur and intimacy. Reeve's portrayal remains iconic, not just for the wire stunt flights or the John Williams score that became synonymous with hope itself, but for the subtle shift in his eyes when Clark Kent became Superman, and the way he embodied strength wrapped in humility. That film wasn't just a superhero movie. It was a modern myth told with the reverence of Greek tragedy and the warmth of a Kansas sunrise. The sequels followed, some more successful than others, with Superman 2 offering a blend of romance and cosmic conflict as Superman gave up his powers for love, only to reclaim them to face General Zod. By Superman 3 and 4, however, the series declined into camp and confusion, with tonal inconsistencies and diminishing returns. Yet even then, Reeve's Superman stood tall, an unwavering symbol in a shifting cinematic landscape. After Reeve, there was a long pause, a silence in the skies. DC tried to revive Superman several times throughout the 1990s, with projects like Superman Lives, famously almost starring Nicolas Cage and directed by Tim Burton, which never made it past pre-production. These near misses became legendary in their own right, a symbol of how difficult it was to recapture the lightning in a bottle that Donner and Reeve had struck. Then came Superman Returns in 2006, directed by Bryan Singer, a spiritual sequel to the Reeve films, with Brandon Routh donning the cape in a performance that aimed to honor the past more than define the future. While visually striking and thematically ambitious, exploring loneliness and legacy, the film struggled to connect with a new generation, and plans for sequels quietly vanished into the ether. That set the stage for a dramatic reimagining in 2013, Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder and starring Henry Cavill. This Superman was different, stoic, conflicted, modern. Snyder's Krypton was a high-tech dystopia. His Clark Kent wrestled with morality, identity, and the weight of expectation in a world that both needed and feared gods. Cavill's Superman was powerful and restrained, raised with love by Jonathan and Martha Kent, but carrying the burden of two worlds. When he snapped Zod's neck in the film's controversial climax, audiences were divided. Some saw betrayal, others saw evolution. Snyder wasn't trying to recreate Donner's Superman. He was forging a myth for a new, Messier era. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice and Justice League further explored Superman's role in a cynical world, his death, his resurrection, his status as both savior and threat. Critics and fans were again split. Cavill's Superman was less talkative, less publicly present, more symbolic than personal. Yet to many, he represented something real. A person trapped by impossibly high expectations, trying to do the right thing in a world quick to tear down its heroes. Over time, appreciation grew for Snyder's grand, operatic vision. The release of Zack Snyder's Justice League in 2021, following years of fan campaigns and studio drama, was a turning point. It restored a sense of narrative coherence, gave Superman his black suit arc, and deepened his relationships with the League. It wasn't Donner's Superman. It was something else. Tragic, epic, mythic. And for a generation, that version meant everything. Meanwhile, Superman lived in other media too. Smallville, running from 2001 to 2011, gave audiences a decade-long exploration of Clark Kent becoming Superman. Layer by layer, trial by trial. Tom Welling's portrayal was grounded, human, and patient, resonating with fans who watched him grow up in real time. Later, Supergirl, Superman and Lois, and appearances in the Arrowverse expanded the Superman mythos on television, with Tyler Hoechlin offering a warmer, dad-like Superman for a new era, still strong, still noble, but smiling more often. On the animated front, Superman thrived. Superman, the animated series in the 90s, part of the Bruce Timm DC animated universe, is still considered a definitive version, balancing science fiction, emotion, and classic values. His appearances in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited showed him evolving from humble hero to trusted leader, while films like All-Star Superman and The Death of Superman brought beloved comic arcs to life with poetic fidelity. Across all these incarnations, one thing stayed constant: Superman as a mirror for our times. In the Cold War, he stood against authoritarianism. In the post-9/11 world, he became a symbol of security and uncertainty. In today's divided climate, he's both questioned and clung to, as if we can't quite agree on what he should be, but we know we still need him. And now, as the world prepares for a new era, the cycle begins again. James Gunn is set to direct Superman in 2025 with a fresh cast and vision, a balance of classic ideals and modern storytelling. Early hints suggest a return to optimism, a focus on Clark Kent's dual identity, and a more hopeful, emotionally grounded tone. Once again, Superman will be reborn for a world that's changed since his last flight. But this has always been the way of myths. They adapt, they evolve, They live through us. And every time Superman takes to the skies on the silver screen, whether in color or black and white, in spandex or CGI, smiling or solemn, he carries with him the weight of our dreams, our fears, and our belief that somewhere, somehow, someone out there is watching over us. Not because they have to, but because they choose to. Part 14. Modern Myths and Alternate Realities. Superman in the Multiverse of Comics. Across the long and winding halls of comic book history, Superman has never stood still. He is not a statue, fixed in place by nostalgia. He is a living myth, reshaped and reborn with each generation that dares to ask not just who Superman is, but what he could be. And nowhere is this more evident than in the sprawling, shimmering multiverse of DC Comics. Since the days of the Silver Age, when editors and writers began introducing multiple Earths to explain continuity quirks, the idea of alternate Supermen has flourished, giving fans a kaleidoscope of identities, fates, and philosophies. We've seen a Red Sun Superman raised in the Soviet Union, a haunting answer to the question, what if the world's most powerful man grew up believing in state over self? In that world, Superman does not fight for the American way. He serves the collective, turning the dream of liberty into a dream of order. It's a tale both chilling and poetic, where the boundaries of morality blur, and we're forced to ask whether power, no matter how pure, can ever escape politics. And then there's Kingdom Come, a reverent epic set in a near future where Superman has retreated from the world, disillusioned by a new generation of violent heroes who treat life like a game. With painterly visuals by Alex Ross and deep theological undertones, Kingdom Come resurrects Superman not as a warrior, but as a messiah torn between justice and vengeance. It's a meditation on legacy, on how ideals endure or crumble in the face of time. We visit Earth 2, where a grizzled Superman fights beside the Justice Society. We see the world of All-Star Superman, where Grant Morrison paints a mythic portrait of a dying Superman, spending his final days performing 12 labors. One last effort to save a world that doesn't always understand him. That series, ethereal and philosophical, offers one of the most beloved versions of the Man of Steel, gentle, wise, and serene in the face of mortality. Elsewhere, we glimpse a tyrant Superman in Injustice, where grief shatters his moral compass after the death of Lois Lane. That Superman imposes order through fear, challenging the idea that Superman's goodness is invulnerable. And still more versions emerge. Val-Zod, the Black Superman from Earth 2, bringing new representation and resilience to the myth. Calvin Ellis, the Superman who is also President of the United States, inspired by Barack Obama, defending Earth while navigating the politics of power. John Kent, the son of Clark and Lois, taking up the cape in modern continuity with a new perspective on gender, climate, and identity. And even Ultraman, the twisted mirror image from Earth 3, who rules through cruelty. Each version adds to the mosaic, not replacing the original, but echoing him, showing us new possibilities. Through crises and reboots, DC has reshaped its universe time and again. Crisis on Infinite Earths merged the multiverse into one. Infinite Crisis brought it back. Flashpoint rewrote history, and Rebirth tried to restore the heart. Through it all, Superman remains central, not just as a character, but as a compass. Where Superman goes, so goes the soul of the DC universe. But even outside of these massive events, the everyday comics have continued to evolve. In the New 52, Superman was younger, more rebellious, still learning the weight of his responsibilities. In Rebirth, he returned to form, a father, a husband, a protector, reaffirming timeless values with the wisdom of experience. The artwork has changed, from the bold lines of Kurt Swan to the cinematic realism of Jim Lee. The writing has shifted too, with voices like Tom King, Brian Michael Bendis, and Peter Tomasi each offering their lens. Some introspective, others action-packed, but all contributing to the ever-growing mythology. And with each reinvention, new readers find their Superman. For some, it's the Golden Age hero who punches tanks. For others, it's the thoughtful alien who quietly questions where he belongs. Superman is all of them, because he's never just been a man. He's a symbol, a story, an invitation to imagine a better world. He's hope. And while Batman may be about overcoming fear and Wonder Woman about truth, Superman is about faith. Faith in people, in kindness, in the belief that someone strong will choose to be gentle. In this modern era of comics, where diversity and inclusivity are reshaping the medium, Superman's symbol continues to adapt. LGBTQ+ readers find affirmation in John Kent's coming out. Readers of color find new icons in Val Zod and Calvin Ellis. Kids and teens see their values reflected in the new Super Sons or animated series like My Adventures with Superman. The S-Shield has become more than a logo. It's a language of belonging. And this doesn't cheapen the myth, it expands it. Because Superman was never meant to be one thing. He's the son of Krypton, yes, but he's also the son of Earth. And as long as this Earth keeps changing, so too will Superman, growing with us, reflecting us, challenging us. In comics, he dies and comes back. He loses his powers and regains them. He battles gods and comforts children. He is immortal and fragile. He is alien and human. And in every panel, he teaches us that true strength is not about how hard you hit. It's about how much you care. So whether you find him in a dusty back issue from 1952, a futuristic graphic novel from 2025, or an alternate Earth where everything is upside down, know this. As long as stories are told, as long as someone looks to the sky and wonders what's possible, Superman will live on. Because he's not just a comic book character. He's an idea, and ideas are bulletproof. Part 15. The Man of Tomorrow, James Gunn's Superman, the future of the character, and the legacy that never dies. And now, we arrive at the horizon, the edge of history where Superman, the eternal myth, walks forward into the unknown. With James Gunn's upcoming film Superman slated to usher in a new era for DC storytelling, a fresh chapter begins. One not just born of nostalgia, but of renewal. This isn't the first time Superman has been reborn, of course. We've seen it with Christopher Reeve's hopeful charm, with Brandon Routh's reverent return, with Henry Cavill's conflicted, godlike presence. Each performance left its own mark, telling a Superman story shaped by its time. But now, under the direction of James Gunn, we face a unique crossroads, a moment when the world is more complex, more divided, more uncertain than ever. And the question isn't just what can Superman do, but why does he still matter? Gunn has promised a story grounded in duality, an alien trying to connect with humanity, a savior who chooses kindness over power, who isn't cynical, isn't broken, but isn't naive either. His Superman, played by David Corenswet, is meant to reflect hope, not in a simplistic, sunny way, but in a modern world full of contradictions. This Superman, if Gunn holds true to his vision, will carry forward the legacy of every version before him, not as an imitation, but as a culmination. And maybe that's what makes Superman so powerful. He is never just a reboot or a remake. He's an evolving conversation between creator and culture. He lives in the space between the panels, between the screen and the viewer, between what we are and what we could be. And so we look forward, not just to one film, but to a future where Superman may once again rise in the public consciousness as more than a character. He may become a compass. Gunn's approach, tied to the new DC universe, offers a chance to reframe not just Clark Kent, but the values he embodies. We might see more of his investigative work as a journalist, a truth seeker in an age of disinformation. We might see his compassion tested in a world that moves faster than kindness can follow. We may even explore deeper, quieter questions. How does an immortal grieve the people he loses? How does he choose who to save in a world full of suffering? And through it all, we will remember what makes him endure. Not his strength, not his cape, but his heart. Because the real truth is that Superman has never been about how high he can fly, but how low he can kneel to listen, how present he can be when someone is hurting, how gentle he is when the world expects force. He is an orphan who became a symbol of family, a godlike being who chose humility, a man born elsewhere who taught us how to be more human. And as we enter a new cinematic era, the myth expands again, not just on screen, but in comics, games, animated series, and fan creations. The digital age allows everyone to share their version of Superman. Artists, writers, and even AI creators bring him into bedtime stories, video essays, and calm documentaries. YouTube channels now retell his story not as loud explosions, but as peaceful meditations on what it means to do good in a complicated world. And people still listen. They still care. Because no matter how much our world changes, no matter how tired or divided we become, we still look up. We still hope. And Superman, more than any other fictional character, remains the embodiment of that hope. His legacy spans nearly a century, from his humble origins in 1938 to a future that stretches into galaxies, timelines, and dreams not yet imagined. He has inspired generations of artists, philosophers, activists, and dreamers. He has been dissected in classrooms, painted in murals, worn on t-shirts, and tattooed on skin. He is the immigrant's story, the dreamer's story, the child's story, the hero's story. And in many ways, he is our story, the part of us that wants to believe there's always a better way. So as James Gunn's Superman prepares to soar once more, remember this. No matter how the costume changes, no matter who wears the cape, no matter what challenges lie ahead, Superman will endure. Not because he's indestructible, but because the world still needs someone to believe in, someone to inspire without preaching, someone who doesn't save us from danger, but from despair. Superman is not just the past. He is the present. And yes, he is the future, the man of tomorrow, forever flying toward the dawn. Part 16 Superman Epilogue, a symbol that outlives time. Why Superman will never fade away. And now, with every era explored and every transformation told, we find ourselves not at an end, but in reflection, looking at Superman not just as a story, but as a phenomenon, a mirror that has followed us through history and somehow always shown us a version of who we want to be. Because Superman is more than comics, more than movies, more than myths. He is, at his core, a cultural heartbeat, reliably pulsing through war and peace, through decades of change, through countless artistic evolutions. And through all of it, he has remained constant. A figure who carries the weight of a world without letting it crush his spirit. Why does he endure? Why does a character created by two sons of immigrants in the Great Depression still stand tall almost a century later? Because Superman is the ultimate what if. What if someone had all the power in the world, but chose kindness? What if the strongest being alive was also the gentlest soul in the room? That fantasy, that hope, is timeless. Superman doesn't age with us. He transforms with us. In the 1940s, he punched Nazis and stood tall for justice when the world needed clarity. In the 1960s and 70s, he became a surreal symbol, tangled in science fiction and metaphors, soaring through space and time to represent bigger ideas. In the 1990s, he died and came back, teaching us that even myths are mortal. And in doing so, reminded us that legacies are not built on invincibility, but on how we inspire others. In the 2000s and 2010s, He became more complex, more human, more unsure, because so were we. He began to ask the hard questions, carry the heavier burdens. And now, in the 2020s, with a new generation rediscovering him through streaming screens, YouTube documentaries, bedtime retrospectives, and digital comic panels, Superman feels fresh again. Not because he changed fundamentally, but because we are learning to see him differently. Not as a relic, not as a goody two-shoes, but as something we always needed, a light. In an age of cynicism, he reminds us that empathy is strength. In a world that often celebrates antiheroes and moral ambiguity, he is a reminder that it's still okay to believe in good. In a media landscape that moves faster than ever, where everything is ironic, sarcastic, or performative, Superman still means what he says. He stands for something, not because it's trendy, but because it's right. He reminds us that strength isn't power over others, but responsibility to others. That being super doesn't mean being above people. It means being of service to them. And in that way, Superman is a kind of spiritual ideal, a secular savior, a myth we keep telling not because we forget how it ends, but because we're still learning how to live by it. He's the immigrant who finds belonging, the orphan who becomes a symbol of family, the outsider who never stops trying to help. And that's why, no matter how many times the comics reboot, or the movies get recast, or the tone gets reimagined, Superman will always find his way back. Because he doesn't belong to a single time. He doesn't even belong to DC. He belongs to us. He lives in the kid who ties a towel around their neck and jumps off the couch. He lives in the adult who keeps trying to do the right thing, even when it's hard. He lives in the quiet moments, when we help a stranger, when we speak up for someone voiceless, when we choose to believe that the world, despite everything, is still worth saving. That's the real legacy, not the heat vision, not the cape, but the choice, the belief that hope matters, that truth matters, that people matter. Superman isn't a fantasy about power. He's a parable about restraint, about how to hold back, how to listen, how to care. And if that story keeps being told, quietly, lovingly, across books and shows and bedtime voiceovers, then he'll never fade. He'll always be out there, somewhere, flying through the night sky, watching, listening, waiting for the moment someone calls for help. And when that moment comes, when the world feels just a little too heavy, he'll be there, because he always is. He'll land gently, with warmth in his eyes, and he'll remind us with a soft voice and a stronger heart, you're not alone. There's always a way. And that's why Superman, the first and greatest of heroes, will never truly say goodbye. Because the world will always need someone to look up to, and a reason to keep looking. Part 17. Across all worlds, alternate realities, elseworlds, and the infinite faces of Superman. Across the vast, star-filled sky of imagination, Superman doesn't live just one life. He lives infinite lives, branching through timelines, alternate realities, and dreamlike elseworlds that reimagine who he is, what he stands for, and what might have been had even one small moment in his story changed. These aren't just fun experiments. They are windows into the core of Superman himself. Because when you strip away the continuity, the costumes, the logos, and decades of history, what remains is a singular idea. That whoever Superman is, wherever he lands, he will still try to do the right thing. In Red Son, he crashes in the Soviet Union instead of Kansas, and we ask, what happens when power grows under the shadow of ideology? In Kingdom Come, we meet an older, weary Superman, struggling to guide a world that no longer values his morals. In All-Star Superman, he is dying and uses his final days not to rage or mourn, but to uplift, to heal, to make peace with Earth and the people he loves. Each story bends the myth, reshapes the icon, and yet, he remains Superman. Whether raised by farmers or found by tyrants, whether he wears black, blue, or no cape at all, his struggle is always between limitless power and the quiet choice to be kind. There's Superman, Earth 1, where a younger, more uncertain Clark Kent tries to find his place in a cynical modern world. There's Superman, Secret Identity, where a boy named Clark, in a world where Superman is just fiction, discovers he somehow has those very powers and must decide what to do with them. There's Injustice, where grief twists Superman into something terrible, and we confront the terrifying thought: what if Superman stopped holding back? And then there's Dark Knights, Metal and Multiversity, where entire universes spin and crack under the weight of impossible choices. There are worlds where Superman is black, like Val-Zod or Calvin Ellis, presidents and protectors. Worlds where he never left Krypton or never arrived on Earth. Worlds where he walks beside Batman or stands against him. And in every single version, even when the path is twisted, his story calls us to ask, what would I do if I had that power? Would I reach out or turn away? Would I care, even when it cost me? These Elseworlds aren't just for comic fans. They're thought experiments for all of us. They show us how flexible the Superman myth really is. That it can be adapted to any culture, any genre, any emotion. That it can survive in horror stories, in political thrillers, in surreal sci-fi, and in quiet love stories. And somehow, even in the strangest versions of him, even in the darkest timelines, there's a heartbeat underneath, a longing to be better, to rise above, to protect. It's why so many creators return to him again and again. Not to copy what came before, but to test the limits of hope. To ask, can this symbol still shine in new ways? Can he still surprise us? The answer is always yes. Because when Superman isn't bound by canon, he becomes myth in its purest form. One that changes shape without losing its soul. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all. That in every world, in every form, Superman reminds us that goodness is a choice. That no matter where you're from, or what the world expects of you, you can choose to lift others. You can choose not to give up. You can choose to believe in people, even when it's easier not to. These aren't just alternate takes. They're reflections of ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our values. They show us what the world might look like if we leaned into courage, or what it might become if we forget compassion. And even in the darkest Elseworlds, Superman never disappears entirely. There's always a version, even buried, even broken, that still wants to do good, that still tries. And that's the lesson in every multiverse. That no matter how different the details, what matters is what you stand for. That's why these stories matter. Not just for fans, but for everyone who's ever asked, what does it mean to be good when no one is watching? In the end, Superman across the multiverse is a single message told through 1,000 different voices, a single truth reshaped by culture, time, and imagination. That we all have the power to help. That we can all be someone's Superman. And maybe, just maybe, the more we tell that story, no matter what world it's set in, the more we start to believe it ourselves. Part 18, Superman and Humanity. His heart, his struggles, and the man behind the myth. When people talk about Superman, they often talk about his powers, the heat vision, the invulnerability, the strength to move planets. But the real story, the one that keeps people coming back decade after decade, isn't about what he can do. It's about who he is. Because underneath the red cape and the alien biology, Superman is a man trying to understand a world that both loves and fears him. He walks through life as Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter from Kansas, not to hide from us, but to connect with us, to listen, to learn, to remember that he may not be human by birth, but he is human by choice. And that's what makes him relatable, even across galaxies. He doesn't just fight monsters. He feels things deeply. He questions. He grieves. He laughs. He doubts himself. He gets lonely. He worries about doing the right thing. He wants to be loved, not worshipped, but understood. And every time he saves someone, it isn't to show off. It's because he can't not help. Because every scream, every falling building, every act of cruelty pulls at his soul. And sometimes that weight becomes too much. Sometimes Superman feels more burdened than blessed. Imagine hearing every cry for help across an entire city and knowing you can't get to all of them in time. Imagine holding back every second of every day because you know a single misstep could level a mountain. Imagine being trusted by billions and wondering if they'd still trust you if they really knew how scared you were. That's the heart of Superman. The restraint. The choice to be gentle, even when no one could stop him from being otherwise. And that choice, that is what separates him from tyrants, from villains, even from other heroes. He doesn't want control. He wants community. He wants connection. His love for Lois Lane isn't just romantic, it's grounding. She challenges him, teases him, reminds him of the world's complexity. She's not a damsel, she's a partner. And through her eyes, Clark sees what it means to be human. Messy, passionate, imperfect, but worth saving. His friendship with Batman is the same, a mirror of what happens when power takes a darker path. Where Bruce is suspicion, Clark is faith. Where Bruce prepares for the worst, Clark hopes for the best. And in that contrast, we see how Superman's optimism isn't naivety, it's courage. The courage to believe that even after the worst, people can rise again. Even after betrayal, we can still trust. Even after war, we can still heal. And that's why Superman doesn't give up, even when he's beaten, even when the world doubts him, even when he's exiled, rejected, misunderstood. He keeps going, because he sees the best in us, even when we can't see it ourselves. That's the true power, not the flight, not the speed, but the faith, the belief that there is always a better way. And it's not easy. It never is. There are stories where Clark feels torn between his Kryptonian heritage and his Earth upbringing. Stories where he struggles to find his place. Stories where he fears he's a danger rather than a gift. And those moments matter, because they make him real, because they remind us that even Superman, the God among men, has doubts, has fears, has to choose to keep being good. That morality isn't automatic. It's active. Every day, he wakes up and decides, I will help, I will protect, I will try. And that, more than any punch or power, is what makes him a hero. The trying, the caring, the choosing to keep going, even when it hurts. That's what makes him someone to look up to. Not because he's perfect, but because he isn't. And still, he tries. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the world needs right now. Not just stories of strength, but stories of heart. Stories that show us it's okay to be unsure, to stumble, to struggle, and still stand tall. Superman's humanity isn't a mask he wears. It's his greatest gift, because through him, we see that the strongest thing anyone can be is kind. Part 19. The symbol of hope. Superman's legacy in culture, philosophy, and the human spirit. Across nearly a century, through war and peace, radio and streaming, comics and cinema, Superman has stood as more than just a superhero. He has become a symbol, a myth woven into the fabric of human culture. And what he symbolizes isn't just strength, flight, or justice. It's hope. Pure, resilient, unwavering hope. The kind that whispers in the darkest moments that we can still choose light. It's why he's the first superhero people picture. The one who's referenced not just in fan circles, but in politics, art, music education. He's taught in classrooms. He's studied in philosophy courses. He's been parroted, praised, deconstructed, and rebuilt. And still, no matter how much the world changes, the symbol on his chest endures, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. That the ideal of Superman is not about what one man can do, but about what we all could do if we dare to believe in each other more than we fear. In cultures all around the globe, Superman's presence isn't just American, it's universal. Because every language understands the meaning of someone who uses power to serve. Every heart recognizes the beauty of someone who could dominate, but instead chooses mercy. And what's most profound is how Superman often reflects back at us, whatever era we're in. In the 1930s, he was the strong man of the people, a champion of workers, immigrants, and the oppressed. In the 50s, he became a wholesome defender of truth in a world afraid of nuclear shadows. In the 70s, he became romantic and mythic, a godlike figure who could catch planes, bend steel, and still blush when Lois smiled. In the 90s, he died and came back, and his resurrection became a mirror of a nation grappling with its own ideals. In modern times, he's been many things: alienated, inspirational, feared, worshipped, doubted. But through it all, he remains constant in one belief: that people are worth believing in. That's the secret to his longevity. Not the costume, not the powers, but the faith. Superman believes in us. He doesn't give up on humanity, even when it gives up on him. Even when it turns on him, questions him, pushes him away. He still stands by, still listens, still saves. Because he doesn't measure our worth by our failures. He sees our potential. And in that way, he challenges us. He invites us to ask, what would I do with power? Would I be brave enough to care for strangers? Would I help without reward? Would I see past differences? Would I forgive? These aren't easy questions, but Superman gives us the courage to ask them. And every generation has found new meaning in his symbol. Children wear his cape and run through playgrounds pretending to fly. Not because they want to be powerful, but because they want to help. Artists paint him reaching for the sun, eyes full of purpose. Poets write about him as a metaphor for love, loss, and the fragility of dreams. Philosophers compare him to ancient deities, but also see in him the humility of a neighbor who never stops lending a hand. Even in criticism, when people say he's too perfect, too outdated, it speaks to how deeply he's ingrained in our consciousness. Because he isn't perfect, he's aspirational. He represents who we could be if we live by our best values. And that's why his legacy matters. Not because he's real, but because the idea of him is. Because the world needs stories like his. Especially now, in times of division, cynicism, and noise. Superman cuts through all that with silence and strength, with a quiet decision to keep doing good, to lift the falling, to stand between the vulnerable and the storm, to offer kindness not as weakness, but as the strongest force in the universe. That's why artists will keep drawing him, why writers will keep imagining new stories, why fans will pass down the legend to their kids and their kids after that. Because he is hope in motion. Not blind hope, but earned hope, the kind that faces hardship and chooses to rise, the kind that doesn't deny pain, but defies it. Superman reminds us that symbols matter, that what we believe in shapes how we act, that stories can change the world. And so long as people need a light in the sky, so long as they need to be reminded that goodness is possible, Superman will still be here, flying above us, watching, waiting, and ready, always, to answer the call. Part 20. The legacy lives on. Superman's enduring influence, the power of his story, and what comes next. As we reach the final chapter of this journey through the life and legacy of Superman, it's hard not to reflect on the sheer magnitude of what this character has become. What started as a simple comic strip in 1938, born from the minds of two young creators, has evolved into one of the most influential figures in modern mythology. Superman is not just a comic book hero. He's an enduring symbol, a living, breathing testament to the power of hope, courage, and the human spirit. Over the years, Superman has inspired generations to reach higher, to be better, and to believe in the impossible. Through every version, from the Golden Age adventurer to the darker, more complex modern interpretations, he has taught us lessons about resilience, compassion, and the importance of never giving up, no matter the odds. His story has endured through wars, social revolutions, and technological advancements because at its core, it speaks to something deep inside us all, the desire to do good, to help others, and to leave the world better than we found it. But as much as Superman represents the idea of perfection, of an idealized version of what humanity can aspire to, he also represents the truth that no one is beyond doubt, beyond fear, or beyond struggle. Superman is a reflection of the best parts of us, his strength, his hope, his sacrifices. And in turn, his journey encourages us to look inward, to examine the way we live our lives, and to ask ourselves how we can be better, kinder, and more understanding of the people around us. The legacy of Superman is also the legacy of all those who believed in him. Fans who saw in him not just a superhero, but a vision of a better future. And it's this legacy that continues to drive new interpretations of the character. From comic books to animated series, from blockbuster movies to fan films, Superman's story evolves to meet the needs of every new generation. But even as the world changes, his core message remains timeless. Truth, justice, and the idea that we are all capable of greatness if we choose to believe in it. And now, with new stories on the horizon, with a fresh wave of Superman stories poised to inspire once again, we must ask ourselves, what does Superman mean to us today? Perhaps his relevance lies not just in the story of one man, but in the way his story reflects our own aspirations, our struggles, and our victories. Whether you're a longtime fan or a newcomer, the story of Superman is a call to action, a reminder that we can all be heroes in our own right, that we can rise above the challenges that life throws our way, and that we can make a difference, no matter how small, in the lives of others. As we close this chapter, remember that Superman is not just a figure on a page or a screen. He is a symbol of what we can all become when we choose to stand up for what is right. He will continue to inspire, continue to teach, and continue to remind us that the power to change the world lies within each of us. So, as we bid farewell to this journey, we leave you with a challenge. What will you do with your own power? How will you use your voice, your actions, and your heart to help others? The world needs heroes now more than ever, and it's up to each of us to answer that call. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into the history and legacy of Superman, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support means the world, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Superman's story resonated with you the most? What lessons do you think we can learn from the Man of Steel today? Leave your comments down below, and make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching, and remember, as long as we believe in each other, we can always be heroes. Stay hopeful, stay kind, and keep looking up to the sky, because the legacy of Superman is far from over.